Hello everyone, this is Ruslan Belov again, back with today's rundown of developments on the Ukrainian front. Let's start with a rather comical statement from Zelensky. He claims Ukraine would be fine if the Americans handed over just 5% of their missile stockpile for the whole winter, and that this would supposedly give the country ironclad protection against ballistic strikes. To show how far this is from reality, let's look at the numbers recently published by American outlets, a report, incidentally, that made Trump quite angry. According to that data, the US currently has around 850, give or take, interceptor missiles for its Patriot systems. 5% of that is roughly 50 units. Since intercepting a single ballistic missile typically takes 2 interceptors, that would cover at best 25 ballistic targets, and that's without counting Russia's S-400 missiles, which differ from Iskanders but are still fast enough that little besides Patriot can reliably shoot them down. Now let's set that against production rates. The Russian army currently produces around 50 ballistic missiles a month, and that pace is climbing nearly 2 missiles a day. That alone would require about 100 interceptors a month, on top of roughly 40 S-400 missiles a month that also need to be intercepted. So Zelensky, true to form, is simply asking for more while inflating the numbers. Something will likely be given to him, but mainly to get him to stop asking, not because it would actually close the gap. Even if the US did hand over the promised 5%, those 50 missiles would last at best 3 weeks, or as little as 2 if 2 interceptors are spent per target. In reality, no one will give him that volume. From the Europeans, he might scrape together 20 to 30 missiles over a month or two, but that's a drop in the ocean. The latest strikes on Ukraine already showed this. The Patriot batteries are there, but the missiles for them aren't. Not a single ballistic missile or S-400 was intercepted. It looks like Ukraine will spend the winter under ballistic strikes with almost no cover, and many people already sense this, scouting backup options in villages instead of relying on shelters in the cities. Now to the front line. As usual, today brings both good news and troubling news. We'll go through everything in order, nothing held back. So friends, today is August 13th, 2026. As always, the positive developments come from the northern sector, while the problems traditionally come from the Koma direction, but the situation turned out considerably worse than expected. We'll take it step by step, starting this time with the good news before turning to the harder part. First, the good news. Over the past day, units of the Siver grouping took control of another settlement, the village of Vodian in Kharkiv region on the Veliki Baluk axis. It's a small village, home to about 120 people before the war, but its significance isn't about size. The moment fighting for Vodian wrapped up, fighting for Okovatka began. That's a larger settlement, an urban-type village with a pre-war population of roughly 1,300. Okovatka sits right up against Vodian, essentially joined to it, so taking the latter naturally opened the assault on the neighboring settlement. There's a territorial upside too. Once Okovatka falls, a pocket of about 15 square kilometers to the east will be cleared, and the eastern flank of the advance will widen to a depth of 9 to 10 kilometers, enough to reduce the risk of overextension, since pushing forward along a front only a couple of kilometers wide leaves troops exposed and hard to cover. The second point matters even more. AFU defenses along the highway in this area rested on 3 strongpoints: the urban-type village of Bili Kolodias, already under Russian control, the village of Prikolotne, and the urban-type village of Okovatka, now under assault. It's hard to say exactly when Okovatka will fall, maybe by the end of August, maybe by early September, or at the latest by mid to late September, but the fact that Ukrainian forces won't be able to hold it looks close to inevitable. After that, Ukraine's only remaining foothold in this sector will be Prikolotne. At the same time, Russian units have begun pushing from the Vodian and Anishchino area toward Dovzhanka, and along that stretch of highway there are no other major settlements before reaching Prikolotne itself. Yesterday also brought objective control footage from around the settlement of Chorn, and fighting there is expected to enter an active phase soon. It's the largest settlement standing in the way of fully sealing the pocket mentioned above. There's a reasonable chance Russian units will complete the encirclement in this sector by the end of the month, taking Chorn from the east and Vasilivka from the west. Once those points are secured, there may be no need to rush the closing of the pocket, since Ukrainian forces might withdraw from the area on their own without a fight, though based on past patterns, they more often stay until the last moment, waiting for the supply routes to be partially cut before pulling back under fire, losing even more personnel along the retreat route. On the Kramatorsk axis, there's notable Russian progress from Markov toward Fedorivka. Every settlement on the road to Kramatorsk matters here. Even when little remains of the buildings after fighting, troops can still take cover in basements, which nearly every private house has. Hills are visible on the map to the north, and taking them is critical, since any elevated position lets first-person view FPV drone operators reach much deeper into enemy rear areas than they could from flat ground. From the Konstantinivka sector, reports indicate Russian units continuing to push toward Osikov and gradually working deeper into the settlement itself. It's too early to expect major positive shifts here. The fight for Oleksiy-Vodrushkivka will likely take considerable time yet. The Ukrainian side is moving in additional infantry, trying to prevent Russian units from gaining a solid foothold in a significant part of the settlement. Next, the Drushkivka axis in the responsibility zone of the center grouping. Control over Petrivka has been confirmed, meaning Russian infantry is now at the immediate approaches to Rysky. The objective control footage from inside the settlement that I mentioned yesterday removes any doubt Petrivka has indeed been taken. With the assault on Oleksiy-Vodrushkivka underway from the south and Russian units also pressing Drushkivka from the west, the town is effectively being squeezed from two directions at once. Once Oleksiy-Vodrushkivka and Reyska fall, it's reasonable to expect the assault on Drushkivka itself to begin. Current estimates put that in the second half of September or early October. As a reminder, at the start of the year, I put the odds of Drushkivka falling this year at roughly 50-50. Now Russian units are right up against the city, and as noted, the assault will most likely start in October. Whether it can be wrapped up before year's end is an open question, but the odds lean toward no rather than yes. There's still plenty of work to do on the flanks, and the city itself isn't small, with a large fortified industrial zone. The most likely scenario is that the city falls over the winter, though the Yug, South, and Cent groupings could still surprise and settle it sooner. Either way, the overall momentum around Druskivka favors the Russian side. Separately, on the push toward Novomykolaivka, Russian open-source mappers report that part of the settlement is already in the gray zone, meaning units have entered the area. There's no objective control footage yet, but it does look like a move to the northwest has begun. Troops were also spotted near Kucho Yar and Huruske. The goal here is reaching the T0514 highway. From Kucheriev Yar, it's still more than 8 kilometers away, and pulling that off by year's end would be a major success for the Russian side, to the harder part, the Koma direction. Yesterday brought a substantial amount of objective control footage, making clear the situation here is worse than it seemed. The loss of control over Mern was confirmed, but we already knew that back in July, when AFU pushed Russian units out. What's new is the loss of control over Voskrashenka and Alexanderrad as well, plus Andriivko-Klevtsove. That's especially unexpected given that objective control footage of Russian troops there came in repeatedly back in July. It seems positions there couldn't be held, understandable enough, since holding a point becomes extremely difficult once control over a wide stretch to the east has already been lost. The loss of roughly 60 square kilometers of territory on its own wouldn't be the most alarming news, if not for the loss of Yalta, a settlement across the Mokry Yali River. As a reminder, just a few days ago I mentioned AFU pushing Russian units out of Zirka. Now control over Yalta has been lost too, and that's a solid staging ground for further pressure. Right now, that direction is being used to press on neighboring Zaporizhia, and if things go badly there and Zaporizhia is lost as well, what follows are open fields and the settlement of Koma, meaning theoretically even holding Koma could come into
The second
question. Worrying point concerns the distance from Voskresenka to the Velika Novosilka-Hulia Pole Highway, currently 16 kilometers. There's still some buffer, but any further push south towards Shevchenko would seriously complicate the picture. Adding it all up across the whole Koma sector, from late May around the 20th through August 13th, nearly 3 months, AFU has retaken about 157 square kilometers of territory here. I measured the area specifically before this episode, and 11 settlements. That's the running total of their offensive on this axis so far. I try to stick to an objective picture of what's happening, and when AFU has successes, we report those too. It would be easy enough to pretend otherwise and only talk about the pocket forming in the north, leaving out the setbacks in the south. But covering things up never leads anywhere good in a war. It's a bit like the recent scandal in the White House, where Trump was furious that the defense secretary had reported no missile shortages, when in fact the situation was approaching critical. Similar episodes of understatement have happened more than once in this war as well. From the Zaporizhia axis, today's news is largely unchanged. It concerns Stepnogorsk, Plavny, Mali Shadwaki, and Orikhiv. Around Stepnogorsk and Plavny, fighting remains active, but no movement in either side's favor has been recorded today, though AFU is reported to be attempting counterattacks, unsuccessfully so far. A similar picture holds around Mali Shadwaki. Yesterday we discussed a 2 kilometers AFU advance there based on video footage that came in, but today only heavy fighting is reported with no change to the line of contact. The same applies to the area around Mala Tukmachka. From the Dobropilya axis, Russian units continue pressing towards Serhivka, while also expanding the zone of control around Mien, Vasilivka, and Novoalexandrivka. Movement is also being tracked toward Hulyai-Poli, and Dobropilya itself. As a reminder, the main line of contact sits just south of the settlement of the same name. It's also worth noting the changes mentioned yesterday and now marked on the map. The entire stretch of territory from Novi Donbass to Belitske up to the supply road has come under Russian control. No further advance in this sector had been recorded as of recording this episode. That covers the frontline situation for today. Now, moving into the geopolitical block, it's worth pausing on the situation around the Strait of Hormuz, since rhetoric between the two sides has flared up again. On Thursday, Hossein Taib, the new head of Iran's Basij paramilitary force, stated that the strait remains under the control and authority of the Islamic Republic, a claim that came a day after US President Donald Trump announced full American control over the strategically vital waterway. As it stands, both sides continue putting out mutually exclusive versions of events, and neither can currently be independently confirmed. According to Taib, quoted by the semi-official Iranian news agency Fars, the US is using its actions in the strait to try to undermine the Islamic Republic's standing in the region and is effectively provoking a new round of conflict, while in his telling, talk of Iran's armed forces being weak doesn't match reality, with Tehran continuing to build up its own security in the area. For context, after US-Israeli strikes on Iranian territory in late February triggered hostilities, Tehran effectively shut down the strait, through which around a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas shipments used to pass. In response, the US imposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports and shipping, saying it was defending freedom of navigation for vessels heading to and from non-Iranian ports. In June, the two sides reached a temporary ceasefire aimed at a lasting halt to hostilities and restoring freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf, but the arrangement didn't hold for long. Within a few weeks, Iran resumed limited attacks on ships it viewed as violating the terms, which in turn prompted renewed US strikes on southern Iranian provinces. Washington said the goal was to degrade Tehran's ability to target ships in the Gulf. Also on Thursday, senior Iranian official Rasul Sanaya Rad said the strait would not be reopened until the other side fulfills its obligations under the interim agreement, adding that unilateral US moves would not change Iran's position. He also warned that in the event of renewed full-scale conflict, Iran would act more decisively and offensively, remarks also carried by Fars.